Yeah, go ahead, academic agent.
So I had two questions I wanted to ask. One for Todd, one for Greg. I was accused of straw manning earlier on when I talked about central planning, but I'd like to know in what ways is Greg proposing something that is any different from literally Stalin? I mean, how is the state that is basically forcing me not to watch porn and basically in these terms, moral fagging all over the place?
Wasn't that a question for me? In the comments, you said it was for me. Oh, you said Todd and Andy.
No, so that was the question for Greg, and I'll ask you the question, Todd, as well. You mentioned something at one point about human flourishing, and my question is, and I think Aristotle would probably agree, if you do not have moral agency and free will, how can human beings flourish? Because I think most people would agree that the biggest thing that humans need for flourishing is some degree of liberty and being able to choose. Like everybody's probably watched Clockwork Orange. That's a Catholic novel by Anthony Burgess. And it's all about, like, if you take away free will from people to be able to commit good or evil, morality itself stops. Because generally I'm up for virtue ethics. Like I quite like Thomas Aquinas, okay? But virtue ethics only makes sense if you have the liberty, if you have the freedom to be able to make good moral decisions. If some twat is telling me what to do all the time, that's not moral at all. That's just coercion. And
yes, I wasn't trolling around, Greg.
So those are the two. So those are the two questions. So Greg, how are you not like Stalin? And Todd, isn't the basic precondition for all virtues moral agency or freedom? So those are the two. I don't know if they want to respond.
Yeah, I'll respond.
With Todd.
Greg, do you want to go first?
No, I don't want to respond to that question.
Okay, I'll respond.
Hold on, Stalin. I mean, that's what Stalin would say. You just have me shot out the back. I want you to explain how your journalism is not like Stalin. It's really.
I think that's an incredibly childish, infantile, stupid straw man question, and I'm not going to answer it. You're going to have to come up with something more impressive if you're going to get me to talk.
All right, I will take my job as a co-host and reformulate the question in a polite manner. So, Greg, what do you advocate for state-imposed morality, or do you think that it could pass through the culture of father and mother teaching stuff to their children? Because that's two very different ways of implementing any form of paternalism. Do you advocate for state invasions of private liberties?
Yes, because adults all sometimes act like children. And in circumstances where adults are acting like children, it seems like we all want somebody to intervene, to put us on the right path, to save us from the consequences of our stupid decisions. We all need state intervention by wiser, more caring people to save us from the consequences of stupid decisions. And that's why state paternalism is a good thing. It's a good thing because it makes us freer if you understand freedom as getting what you really want, which is to lead a good life.
Can I ask you another question? This is really important.
I'm completely bewildered that because you can't help yourself from watching porn, you want a totalitarian dictatorship from forbidding you to do that. That is like
anything about a totalitarian dictatorship.
Because what you're asking
straw man. This is the straw man that
it's not. You're asking for it and you don't know it. Okay, if someone's smarter than you,
as if we haven't had paternalistic governments that weren't totalitarian dictatorships.
Hold on.
I can't believe our whole political discussion has started with Greg tonight wondering if he should watch porn, and here we are remaking the whole philosophy.
I want somebody to stop me. I want somebody.
There's a question that was posed to me.
Yeah. So now Todd can answer on the question of academic agent.
Right.
Okay. Well, there's two things I want to add. I'll first answer with the question he asked me. Yes, a certain level of moral agency and free will is required. But by the same token, we should legalize theft, murder, and rape, because unless we have the state to step in to tell people what to do, they're not going to have the free choice to voluntarily choose to be a good boy. Now, the other thing I want to answer is this thing about Stalin. Well, let me think. 1960 America. Pretty much everything that we've been talking about banning, except for alcohol, was banned. And if you go back to 1920s America, then everything we're talking about was banned. And America was not a Soviet state. In fact, last I checked, we were the bastion of the free world against Soviet communism from 1920 to 1960. And lastly, the idea about father-mother paternalism in the state. See, that's the problem. As Aristotle pointed out in the Politics, the state is a natural social evolution of the family. So it isn't even a clear distinction to be made in the first place.
Okay, I've got a real practical question to ask here, okay? Because you talked about like knowing things, like we know all sorts of things are good for us, okay? Like I know it is better for me to eat like chicken salad than it is to eat like McDonald's Big Mac, okay? I know it is good to work out in the gym and spend lots of time there, as opposed to sitting on my ass making YouTube videos all day, okay? Or playing video games and wanking, okay? But I have the freedom to make those choices, and you know, I'm flawed as a human being, and I don't always choose to go to the gym or eat the chicken salad. Sometimes I choose to, you know, eat McDonald's, make YouTube videos, and wank to cuckold porn. Okay, now I guess my question is, where do you draw the line? So, are you going to have, in your paternalistic world, are you also going to be forcing me to go to the gym? Are you going to be forcing me to eat chicken salad, or is it only these things? Only these particular issues around, for some reason, homosexuality and porn that you have a particular hang up with, or are you actually going to be organizing all parts of my life, like these other areas that we know are definitely, you know, it's definitely more virtuous to work out, right, than to not work out. So where do you draw the line?
Okay, first short answer is that, well, the idea that people dying of, well, alcohol poisoning or dying from these sexually transmitted diseases is anything remote to any social dysfunction that's related to not working out. It's just patently absurd. And second of all, how America did it in 1920. What I'm wanting to hear here is how 1920s America was the Soviet police state with jackbooted thugs doing all these terrible things that that Greg and I are constantly bombarded with. The fact is, this was the center of the free world as you would have understood it. This
Todd, I think you're mischaracterizing the difference between good nutrition and exercise and sexual disorders, because right now, sodium is killing much more people than AIDS in America. So it seems that if you go solely by the facts of the well-being, you would be much more investing your time much better if you were to police people on how much salt they eat every day, then police them on sexual behavior. So it seems that you're not that much motivated by the factual medical well-being of people. It seems that you have something about sexual behavior.
JF. The problem with that, JF, is that if the amount of medical research that has been invested to cure STDs were invested to be a quick fix for obesity, obesity wouldn't be a problem. See, people aren't forced to bear the consequences of their past.
No, that's not it. No, I'm sorry.
Okay,
you haven't answered the question.
Obesity will always be a problem. Like, and
no,
we know
I did answer the question. The question is clear: is that these before we had sophisticated antibiotics, the sort of AIDS epidemic that was spreading due to homosexual activity was just horribly destructive to society. But now we have, government mandated healthcare and cheap healthcare for all these people, so they don't have to pay the cost.
Hold on. What does antibiotics have to do with AIDS?
Because no, the problem is well-being. JF was saying that mortality.
AIDS is a virus. Antibiotics are for microbes. Why?
But modern medicine, let's just rephrase it in modern medicine, has negated these negative health consequences. And I suppose if we continue to have modern medicine applied to obesity, which they seem to be doing now, so it's not comparing, it's comparing apples to oranges.
People get obese because they eat greasy foods, because they don't work out, because if you have a lifestyle where you go to the office and then you go to the car and then you come home and you sit at the computer And people also get obesity because, for instance, they can't afford to purchase expensive meat, so they will buy sausages and other things that are filled with greasy foods, but they're cheap and easy to digest. Plus the fast food, and plus certain genetic illnesses like diabetes and, for instance, thyroid problems. That's why you get obesity.
But it is.
No, we're not talking about obese. No, I'm not talking about the fact that people are obese. We're talking about the negative health factors.
How can you cure obesity? Like that is
no,
not like.
We're not talking. This is straw manning. I'm talking. JF asked me a very specific question.
Todd, it seems to me that you're saying that the cardinal sin, the cardinal vice of gluttony is now allowed because modern healthcare can somehow like give people like a liposuction and deal with obesity. I'm asking, why aren't you forcing me to go to the gym and eat chicken salad as opposed to McDonald's on the same basis that you're banning my porn? It's exactly the same thing. It's just a different vice. And I want to know, why aren't you doing that to me? Maybe Greg would. I mean,
I would. I actually wrote an essay called "How About Fascist Medicine?" And I do think that a paternalistic state should encourage people to eat well and have healthy habits. And I think that should start in public education, and it should be encouraged through adulthood. And if people fall off the wagon and get fat, they should be forced to bear the full consequences of getting fat. One of the reasons why there's such an antipathy on the part of healthy people to socialized medicine is healthy people don't want to pay for the angioplasty of lard asses. They don't want to do that. They take care of their health, and they don't want to be subsidizing the hemorrhoids and the heart disease of people who don't. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. And so one of the things I propose is that we really do need to make people jog for the master race, as the Dead Kennedys song.
So you're going to get like literally by gunpoint, like jog for Stalin?
Yeah, jog for Stalin. That's right. No, seriously though, we do need to incentivize health. And we need to start by giving people good habits, because virtue ethics is a great thing.
Do you shut down McDonald's? Do you shut down McDonald's?
I would make corn syrup more expensive than caviar. I would tax that stuff to the point where no one would ever want to use it.
But this is central planning. Yeah, this is my point. You said
no, you can't call a spade a spade. That's a straw man.
This is central planning. You are trying to socially engineer society, like a
I'm trying to socially engineer society. Central planning means that the government is the sole producer and employer of everyone.
You said you want to tax corn syrup so that people don't get fat. That
doesn't mean that I believe that the government should be the one who produces and distributes all goods. That's central planning. That's the straw man that you guys are running towards.
You're taxing corn syrup isn't because of an economic reason. You're taxing it so people don't buy it. That is central planning, mate.
You want to call that central planning? I just call it paternalism, and it exists in societies that do not have socialist central planning. So somehow we've managed to have cigarette taxes and alcohol taxes in America without socialist central.
In this country, in the UK, we had a socialist government under a prime minister called Clement Attlee, and it was literally this kind of Christian paternalist Fabian society bullshit. It was exactly this. I mean, it wasn't like Marxist socialism. It was this kind of Christian form of, trying to engineer better outcomes. And it was a fucking disaster economically and all the rest of it, because it doesn't matter if you're Christians, Muslims, communists, or anything else. You cannot control supply and demand in this way. It just doesn't it always leads.
And not only
that is just simply not true.
We do tax cigarettes and other things because they're called vices, so it's a vice tax, right? It's like a luxury. Yeah. But you don't tax syrup because it gets people fat. That is the difference between a vice tax and central planning, mate.
That's a distinction without a difference, I'm afraid. No, I think that we should have vice taxes for things like sugary sodas and so forth. That would be good and we should take that money and we should use it for healthcare for fat people. so that they subsidize their own health care.
And no, I'm not in favor.
How about Greg? How about just making a healthier food, organic food, all that more affordable? Because if you were to shop at a place like Whole Foods that has, you know, organic food and better food, everything is priced up to a point where it's almost like unnecessary, not worth it for people to purchase. So would you be opposed to just making healthier food more affordable and then keeping corn syrup and all that stuff the way it is right now?
No, I would definitely put excise, sin taxes, vice taxes, whatever you want to call them, on things like corn syrup.
But why? I mean, why do you think?
Curious. People in the chat who wants to live in Greg's utopia, press 1.
Well, here's what I'd like to know.
Come on, let's not do appeal to the popularity.
I would like an explanation of how the centrally planned, quote-unquote, WASP Puritan United States went from a frontier society in 1620 to put a man on the moon. I thought this stuff fails overnight.
Well, it's not central planning. The reason that the United States did well is because it always protected property rights. It gave people. I mean, you can go back to Jamestown. They tried doing it by the whip. Failed. They almost all died, and then they gave people individual parts of land, and now the farmers were incentivized because they were working for themselves, and the society flourished. I'd recommend a book called Why Nations Fail, and nations fail for instituting the sorts of policies that Greg wants to implement, and it doesn't matter what you call it. There is only basically inclusive institutions and inclusive societies that give people the freedom to flourish out, or there are extractive totalitarian ones that shut all of that stuff down, and they all fail.
That's just nonsense. That's historically speaking nonsense.
It's not nonsense.
No, it is. From the beginning of this country.
It's libertarian nonsense.
Yeah.
On stilts.
From the beginning of this country until 1960, all of the sexual things that Greg and I are talking about were banned. And guess what? We were the center of the free world. We put a man on the moon. I'm trying.
Why did they stop being banned? What made it so that they're
communism? The whole communist takeover the academy.
What was the Communist Party of America that took over the United States, and when did that happen?
So do you believe in cultural Marxism, V?
I do believe in cultural Marxism.
Exactly, those guys.
Okay, why did those guys get traction?
That's kind of irrelevant why they got traction.
No, it's not irrelevant. It's very relevant, because if you wouldn't have banned these things, they wouldn't have talking points in order to mobilize people and push their agendas. That's why.
Okay, then why did they only do that in the 1960s and not for the previous 300 years of the U.S. country?
Well, when was cultural Marxism invented? Well, not invented, but
that's the point. There were no substantial critics of this regime that Greg and I are advocating until the 1960s. The very
Your regime used, because of its irrational bannings on things, which I'm sure you consider rational, allowed the cultural Marxists to take advantage of. Because if I would live in a country where alcohol is banned, but everywhere in the world is not, then yeah, when a cultural Marxist come along and say, you know, if you advocate with me, I'll give you back alcohol, a lot of people are going to be tempted to do that.
Well, here's my question. Why is it that every time we get a gain in, quote, my liberal rights, the cultural Marxists get more power? Are the cultural Marxists more powerful now or in 1920?
How many videos do I have against cultural Marxists on my channel versus how many do you have?
That's irrelevant. We're talking about the actual real world political power they have.
Yeah, and I am a person in the real world fighting against their ideology.
A losing battle.
I don't think you're helping, honestly. I don't think you coming up and saying you want to ban porn, you want to ban alcohol, you want to ban all these things are going to get more people on your side than on the cultural Marxists. Because people are going to look at your arguments and are going to go, oh, holy shit, if this is the alternative, I might as well go watch a Disney movie where they have black people dressed as aristocrats in France, because at least they're not trying to ban my liberties.
Well, that's just demonstrably false, because the alt-right, which has been advocating the points that Greg is talking about...
What is the party of the alt-right right now? Which are the advocates in the political spectrum for the alt-right?
Where are your political advocates in the political spectrum today?
There's plenty of political advocates in the political spectrum. Look at Poland. Look at Hungary. Look at all these countries that don't have the alt-right, and yet for some reason, mysteriously, also have alcohol and porn and manage to keep away the waves of refugees and the waves of cultural Marxism.
Did you say Poland and Hungary?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because they're Christian. 2 years ago, they declared Christ was king of Poland with the ceremony with the
they're Christians, and yet people in those Christian countries can drink alcohol. People in those countries can watch porn. And you know what? People can fuck without going to jail. How do they manage it? Astonishing, isn't it?
Well, no,
I have to stand by V's analysis here, even if I wouldn't necessarily use the word cultural Marxism, and I would put aside the semantics. V is pointing out that unjustified prohibition of some stuff has justified an uprising, and he's correct. In American history, the hippies, essentially, they have gained their uprising precisely because there were too many things banned. Yeah, go ahead, academic agent.
I mean, I've had this long-running theory because, you know, in my real life, I'm an academic, and I actually write it. I mean, some parts of I just written this book, and there's a number of chapters on the Reformation. And as I was writing this, it became really clear to me that, like, the Puritans were literally the SJWs of their day. Like, they were entirely SJW. And I've got this theory that the reason that we have things like the Me Too culture, the Me Too thing now, and white guilt, and all of these kind of witch hunts on Twitter, is because that kind of Puritan culture has slowly morphed over time into SJWism, and it's exactly the same thing. And I have this idea that Me Too couldn't work in a country which doesn't have that history of kind of Puritan guilt. Like, I don't imagine like an Italian Me Too movement. Like, can you imagine like trying to stop like Silvia Berlusconi slapping Italian girls' asses? I don't think it would happen. I think it's very particular to a certain strain of Northern European Puritanism, which I mean, is there anything more Puritan than the concept of white guilt? It's just you've replaced the notion of total depravity, which Calvin had, with the notion of you know, the original sin in this case is whiteness. But it's exactly the same mindset. And I was wondering if Todd or Greg would respond to this, because in what ways are the Puritans different from the SJWs? I mean, they're exactly the same. They're trying to tell us what to do. They're trying to make us feel guilty for all of our decisions. I mean, tell us how it's different.
In what way is Plato different from the SJWs on your account? Is Plato a Puritan?
Well, he's not. I mean, I think that there's always been this struggle. There's a really good book by Arthur Herman called "The Struggle for the Soul of Western Civilization" as being between Plato, who's a rationalist and basically totalitarian in his thinking, and Aristotle, who's much more on this side of empiricism and freedom.
That's a completely arbitrary distinction.
But
it's completely not based on the actual political and ethical doctrines of Aristotle. Aristotle was just as paternalistic and just as oriented towards using the state to promote virtue as Plato was.
Here's the thing: it's in Aristotle, he allows more. I guess he allows things to be a little more organic. He doesn't appeal to the philosopher king all of the time. Or certainly the system of thought that comes from that. So I'm really surprised that people like you guys who are espousing virtue ethics are being such SJWs about it. Basically, I mean,
maybe what we need to do is come up with a better concept than SJW to describe the pinnacles of Western tradition in philosophy.
How about Puritan? How about Puritan?
Because that's a small sect of Christians.
Okay, so Saint Augustine then, and it's all the same. I mean, Saint Augustine spent his entire life fucking, and then said, "Oh, actually, I want to become chaste now, and everybody else has to do the same." It leads to all of this nonsense.
How about the police of vice and virtue? Would you be okay with?
I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Christian at all in any sense of the word, and I think that going back to classical Greek virtue ethics and politics is perfectly justified. Nobody's come up with a better system of politics than Aristotle, for instance. There are certain modern thinkers like Hegel and Montesquieu and others who have added little details, painted the eyebrows on little things, you know, made perfections and tweaks, but there's nothing better than Aristotle and Plato. And we need to go back to that. And if you look at politics in that context, it's based on biology, not arbitrary religious revelation. And it's oriented around creating a form of society where, as individuals and as groups, we can flourish and actualize ourselves. And that is a perfectly illiberal form of politics, because it doesn't make a fetish out of uninformed individual decisions. And when I hear people say, oh, you have to give freedom for people to make mistakes, that's so dumb. If people know better, why should you force people to make easily preventable mistakes and bear the costs of that?
Where is the moral agency? Where is the moral agency?
May I just say this, academic agent, this is important. This is a small little asterisk, but it's very important. The concept of moral agency that you are presupposing is actually a Christian notion. It's not something that's clearly present in Plato and Aristotle. For Plato and Aristotle, the education of human beings in virtue is on a continuum of educating dogs and horses. We're not moral agents in that sense. And the idea that we need to give people the freedom to be evil or good, I think that's a completely false idea that's been and guess who inserts that into the mainstream of Western thought and at the foundations of the kind of liberalism that you advocate. It's the Puritans. This is what you're advocating. It's the Puritans who foisted that idea on you. And that is at the